Welcome to Wednesday Q&A, where you all ask the questions and we answer with joy, with dedication, with love. I am joined, as always, by my gorgeous co-host, Kristen Williams.
Hey, Laura. Hey, everybody. All
Hey,
right.
hey.
With joy. I love that. All right. Let's answer our first question here with joy. This question came from our friend, Julie Miller, Aussie Down Under. She says she has a question about a long-term acquaintance who has told her she has adrenal fatigue. She confided that long-term stress and life has brought this on. She's approximately 60 years of age. Any suggestions? I would dearly love to help her and wonder what you and Laura might suggest. Does she need to get on top of her fatigue before we might be able to do some gentle lit yoga? Anything specific you can suggest? She is under medical and naturopathic treatment. She previously had been exercising, unsure what she was doing, but hasn't done anything for quite a while. And so, for people who don't know, what adrenal fatigue is, it's actually, I don't know that it's an accepted medical diagnosis per se, but it is it's very similar to a fibromyalgia or this kind of non-specific autoimmune response to stress, and sometimes even in response to adrenal insufficiency. And so, if you have someone, I think would be more common with someone who has kidney disease or has had a kidney removed. They really want to protect, the one kidney left, that it doesn't get overused, and then you start suffering, some symptoms from insufficiency. And some of the symptoms are fatigue, just kind of sleeplessness, nervousness, a lot of the same symptoms that we see in people who have these nondescript autoimmune fibromyalgia type diagnoses. So I guess, my initial answer to that would be, and the first thing I looked up, I'll be honest, I pulled out my phone, I Googled, are there contraindications to adrenal fatigue? That is something that, as a physical therapist, as any type of a medical professional, this is not my specialty. So the very first thing I always do if something's not in my wheelhouse that I know back and forth is I look up to see. I don't want to give the wrong information. And so, there aren't any direct contraindications except for the same ones that you would have for someone who, say, like, both of my parents only have one kidney. My father donated his to his brother, and then my mom had one taken out because she had a small, cancerous tumor in it. So they have a matching set between the two of them. We kind of joke about that. But, neither one of them take Advil. They take Tylenol because there are certain medications that put more stress, really medication, period, puts more stress on your kidney and your liver because, those are our organs that are kind of constantly cleansing, the body of what comes into it. So, that would be my first thing that I may suggest to somebody if they said, I'm suffering from this, like, what are you putting into your body? And, how can we be a little bit more clean? But, Julie was asking directly about, exercise and lit. And I personally, knowing that stress, cortisol, is something that could aggravate this or bring on these type symptoms. I mean, I see in my own body, but we absolutely see across the board that, exercise, even if it starts off gentle, can decrease stress. I mean, it's been shown. So I think there's a fear factor because they're tired. So there's a fear of getting more tired. But, I think just what Julie said, starting gentle, listening to the body the same way I would work with someone who, say, has MS or, where these autoimmune diseases, we really have to listen to the body, I think. The body can get a little dysregulated, I think, from some of the signals that it sends to the brain. So is the fatigue really fatigue, or can we push it just a little bit? But we want to be mindful of the fact that, we want to listen. And it's never going to be no pain, no gain. It's never going to be work harder, work smarter, not harder, I think is true. But, I would start her absolutely on some just gentle lit yoga, the reset. Getting good posture is going, finding good posture is going to decrease stress in the body. Movement. I always feel better after I practice. Not absolutely 100% of the time after I do my lit practice, I feel better in my whole body. Even if it's a gentler, my stretch class is something that, people will they show up because they feel good afterwards. We feel good with movement. We feel energized with movement. But there is this fine line to walk when you're dealing with someone who is having more of an autoimmune / stress-related, I wouldn't call it diagnosis, but symptoms. Laura, what else do you have to add up to this?
Well, the first thing, just really piggybacking off of what you said, and I think this is actually important, is that it isn't actually a diagnosis that is accepted. I mean, Harvard Health said this is not a diagnosis, but it's being given. Let's look at that as a good thing, because that means that we aren't going to be stuck in some kind of diagnosis where, the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys and they release these different hormones, including cortisol. So what it's basically saying with adrenal fatigue is that there's just been an abundance of cortisol release that just causes this stress and fatigue. And I think that if you are diagnosed with it, I imagine that makes you feel more fatigued, right? Like that's where a diagnosis could actually, so I'm saying that's why it's actually good that it's not a diagnosis, an accepted medical diagnosis, because I think diagnoses can help us understand something that's happening, but they can also really limit us.
And cause stress.
Yes, right. So it isn't to say your symptoms are not real. You feel tired, you feel drained. She said she's 60. I mean, this is perimenopause to menopause. All these changes in your hormones affect the other hormones. So if you're having imbalances in your testosterone, your estrogen, your progesterone, that's also going to impact your cortisol. So she's seeing a naturopath. That's great. They're probably looking at that. But if they're not already looking at that, she definitely needs to check those hormones to see if there's any kind of way to balance those out. And then to your point, if we know that there is a fatigue caused by excessive or purported excessive cortisol, movement, unless you're doing they say cortisol isn't really increasing with exercise except for people who are working too hard or for too long. Say endurance athletes actually do get a lot more stress, and it's a cellular stress. So it is hard on their bodies, but it's hard on their cellular environment as well. Other than that, that's not what we're doing here. We're not going for a 60-mile run. You're moving your body, you're breathing better, you're mobilizing tissue, freeing up fascia, improving postural dynamic and static posture, which is super important for everything. Your lymphatics, your breathing, all the things that are going to help you recalibrate. But you can do small doses, I think the best advice right off the bat is that don't fear movement. Know that movement is actually going to make you feel better. It's hard to feel that when you're exhausted and you don't know why, but if you do gentle movement, it really will help that recalibration. That's the best advice I can give. And also don't get too locked into this thing that you've been diagnosed with, because I feel like that can really prevent people from, mentally moving beyond it.
I agree.
All right, next question. Let's see. It'll come from, you want me to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, this is from Sun and Salads. What is the clunk in one hip that sometimes happens while doing ab work lying on the back? You want to start with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I can certainly speak to my own body. I mean, especially when you feel it in your hip. And that happens to me, and it's usually on one side, versus the other. I would suspect the ab work she's talking about, would be where she's lowering a leg, say, both legs up, we lower one halfway, a third of the way, and you hear or feel, and both, a clunk in the hip. I think what a lot of times that is a lack of core integration. And so we're allowing the pelvis to move, and the pelvis is the socket for the hip. And we've got a lot of our hip musculature, the psoas in particular, the iliopsoas, that the tendon kind of goes right over a little bony prominence there in the front of the hip. And that's what people get with snapping hip. But, when you're lowering, and I think you're on the ground, it can sound a lot more like a clunk, and it's like a shift. I have found 100% of the time in my own body, when that happens, if I tighten down into my transversus abdominis and I really focus on that lowering, it does not happen. It is a sure sign of me just getting a little body lazy in my core. I let my back lift up, my pelvis is tilting. So if you can stabilize the pelvis, which is the socket, by way of your, maintaining a nice neutral pelvis and a nice neutral spine, try lowering that leg and see if it doesn't resolve. Because while you feel it in the hip, I don't think in most cases it is a hip issue. Now, why does it happen on one side versus the other? I mean, I think I have imbalances in my body. I can feel it. I know I have imbalances where my obliques are just weaker. And by weaker, I mean, there's a neurological weakness. Like, I have to, on one side, be like, look at them. Come on, dudes, let's go. They just don't. And that's postural. That's something I do throughout the day. The way I sit, I tend to favor one side. We all do it unless we focus on not doing it. So we have these imbalances, which is why for me, it's my left hip. My left hip, I go to occasionally the right, but I would say 90% of the time, my left hip, I'll go to lower. If I'm distracted, if I'm being lazy in my core, I will clunk. I mean, and it can be almost embarrassing. You're like, geez, if you're at a class. So my advice to Sun and Salads is try tightening into the core and see if that doesn't do it. Laura, what else do you have to add to that?
That's exactly it. I mean, think of the limbs, which is your upper body, your arms and your legs, as movers, as locomotors, but they require this lever to move well, because, when you have a lever and a stability, a kind of a leverage point, you can move well and hold on to your energy and have that controlled mechanism. And then if you're doing this like running or something like that, where you're moving the hip, you control it. It's the same thing. It's just that you've gone from vertical to now horizontal, and then you have gravitational forces on that long lever of the leg. But go to where the leverage point is, which is your pelvis. So focus on the sacrum staying steady, lowering the leg, but also simultaneously feeling like you're pulling that limb deeper into the pelvis to give that leverage of the entire pelvis more stability. And like you said, KB, use it as a way of like, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does happen, just establish and organize all the core musculature that will help the thoracopelvic cylinder, your rib cage and your pelvis, stay really stable. And you don't have to lower it as much until you really can feel that. And but the big thing is, like, you're pulling on a stocking, pull that femur deeper to stabilize its position in the pelvis as it moves. We get a lot, whether it's like in dolphin and you have a leg up and then you're thinking about forearm balance, we get really focused on the distal end, which is your foot. And really, we need to focus on the proximal end. And that, if you focus on it there, it becomes easier, when you turn your shape around and you have different types of gravitational forces. But you're going to have that feeling of real consolidation in center. And it's just, that's what makes it feel so light and joyful. Yeah. So give that a shot.
It's an aha moment when you figure that out, when you figure out move from the center, it's like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
what a game changer. And so, yeah, in our abs, it's the same. Yeah, we're just in a different position, but same idea. Great,
Yep.
great question. Because I know she's not alone. I'm right there with her. I feel it. And I'm like, shame on you, Kristen. Pay
Yeah.
attention, be compassionate.
Wake it up, baby. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
But, all right. We have a question here from lit practitioner and our friend Michelle Ray. She wrote in just a quick question here. She says, do you know how to release a contracted side oblique? It seems one has learned to hold very strongly and is only convinced to relax via exercises. So, Laura, do you want to kick off that one?
Yeah, sure. So we have two sets of obliques, one external and one internal. The internal are more internal; they're deeper, and so I'm probably assuming that you're meaning the external ones, which I think are more obvious. And that a lot of people can grip with them on one side. It could be just a habitual stance where that side is more compressed. So the first thing I would always say is like, let's look at your posture in sitting and in dynamic movement, and what is your tendency on that one side? Is it to be compressed? And is it the obliques and they're just trying to stabilize the ribs because the, glutes aren't performing well and you're kind of hanging on? So it could be above and below that are causing the obliques to want to be a little bit more grippy. So that's what I would look at is really how you're holding yourself and moving in space. You want to feel that. I taught a class and it's called Stack and Grow. And it's like the little kid toy that has the, big circle and the little circle and you stack in this bowl. And we think about the pelvis is the bottom. It's the largest. But then we come above that and the ribs are really important and how they stack. But you got to look at like the position of your pelvis. That's going to really influence your thorax and vice versa. So you might feel like maybe your pelvis is doing fine, but maybe your neck is not so much when your ribs are impacted. It's all connected. And often when we get a kind of shortening, a gripping, a more contraction on one side, it's because of some kind of habitual movement or sitting position. It could be from the shoulder, like when somebody says they've got a slopey shoulder, you can't just look at like, oh, that must mean that they're weak there. It could be that that's compressed on that side and they do need more scapular strengthening, and that'll help the obliques because they're probably doing that either because they're just positioned to do it or they're trying to do something because other things aren't coming into play as much. I don't know if that really answers it, but the best thing to do is know that this takes time, repetition, awareness. We want ultimately these things to become subconscious, just like our suboptimal habits are subconscious. We want our better optimal habits to become subconscious. But until we're there, you need to check in. You need to use your hands. The other thing to do is look at your QL, because if your QL, that's your quadratus lumborum, there's one on each side. It attaches from the pelvis to the lower ribs and back. If it's shortened, it will also cause some compression in the ribs that might make those obliques feel like they're being sticky or stuck. So look below, look above, and then look in between, like literally like how everything is functionally stabilizing this cylinder, the stacking as you're moving through space.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I was just talking about that in the last question about how I have one side that I have to stare at. And it's, I see it. And this is where kind of talking about the subconscious versus the conscious. What I love about lit is we talk about this stuff. And what I love about yoga is everything's done on both sides. So you can always compare your body every single day. And then we talk about it in a very, I think, layman's body educating way to where I found myself looking at my own body throughout the day, and I've picked up on habits that I have. And so I make a conscious effort to change my habits that over time, it's much like you said, it's much more subconscious, where I go into a more central, balanced position because I no longer go into that old habit because I've consciously changed it. But in the short term, Michelle, if you can, work on, and I don't know if you're talking about yourself or somebody else, but absolutely what Laura's talking about. Look at yourself throughout the day. Look at yourself on your mat, like if you find that one airplane feels off, kind of square your pelvis there to make the hip on that side. Might be lazy, you're kind of opening up into your airplane because maybe it's the hip that's weak. Maybe it's the adductor on one side is tight. It is. If look above, look below, and look at it. To me, this is like fun. Now, maybe I'm geeky like that, where biomechanics are fun to me. I get kind of excited when I find an asymmetry. I'm like, ooh, how can I fix this? So have fun with that, and then use some of kind of like I was talking about. Look at it, put your hand on it to help maybe it, not on it to release, put your hand on the other side to contract. Are you underperforming on the other side, which kind of what Laura was talking about? It will shorten if the QL is tight, but maybe the other side, just like on holiday, and if you put your hand on the other side, you'll find that will help to dynamically stretch that shortened side. And if you're all looking at me on YouTube, I'm putting air quotes around shortened because I don't know that things really ever get, they do after prolonged, let's say if you've been in a cast, yes, things will shorten. But in our bodies, if you have scoliosis, yes, things can be shortened, but many times it is a functional shortening, meaning if you actively contract, you can come right out of it. So look to the other side. See if you can't encourage the opposite oblique to work, to shorten a bit, and to open up that side.
One more thing I'll add, just because we said below and above, but go all the way down to the feet as well. Like, what are you wearing? Are you wearing even something with a little heel? That displaces your pelvis, and all the way up. Again, those obliques might be trying to stabilize the thorax over the pelvis, and that's their way of doing it because your pelvis isn't aligned because of your feet. And maybe your feet are clapped. It's just, you got to look all the way down because the position of your feet, the stability of your feet can impact the pelvis, the pelvic floor control and dynamic stability all the way up into the rib cage and the obliques. So, and if you want a good stretch, I agree with you, strengthen the other side, but like do a little door frame hang. So nice for getting all that tissue of the lats, the QL, but including the rib cage, stretches the rib cage. So you just grab around the door frame. You don't even have to pick up your feet. You just bend the knees a little bit, depending on how tall you are. Katie and I are tall enough to do that.
I know. We can totally do it.
Yeah.
You can grab the side, too.
Yeah.
Side and lean
over. Lean over, right?
Really
so just
get
like,
in.
yes.
Same idea.
Mm-hmm.
One of my
very
favorite
good
stretches.
Well, as always, thank you for these lovely questions. We accept all questions. You can ask us, and you can always ask us to be anonymous. We're totally fine with that. So you can write us directly at support@lityoga.com, or you can also find us
on Instagram. You can direct DM us, Laura@Laura.Hyman, and I'm at KBWilliams99. You can also DM our Redefining Yoga podcast. If you are not a follower, check it out because that will let you know when your favorite Q&A drops. We've got amazing people on our Friday with Friends. Laura does a superb monthly motivation. So keep an eye on, if you follow, you'll know when the next one drops. And
share with others, share the love. As always, we really appreciate if you rate and review and subscribe to the podcast. We are an award-winning podcast, so we can toot our horn, and we want more people to know about us. So please do that. We're so, so appreciative, and we love you. And as always, we're pulling for you.
We're pulling for you.